Happy holidays, everybody. To celebrate, here's my review of Dishonored for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This review is coming to you courtesy of Lex. He sent me this, so thank you. It is extremely well appreciated. This is a stealth action game by Arkane Studios that was published by Bethesda in October of this year, 2012. And it was to a large amount of acclaim, which actually surprised me considering it's Arkane Studios. They made Dark Messiah of Might and Magic and Arx Fatalis. If you've seen my review of Dark Messiah, you know I really like that game a lot. It's just really fun to play. And when I heard about Dishonored, I was absolutely pumped. A stealth action game in a kind of steampunk setting, that was just great. I hadn't really seen all that much before then. I mean, you'd had Thief long before that, but before Dishonored, you didn't really have much apart from Thief. So I was really curious as to how they were going to pull it off and what they would do to mitigate the fact that they do have some issues with their development. I mean, Dark Messiah was really buggy, and Arx Fatalis had its issues, don't get me wrong, but they were still enjoyable nonetheless. So the real question there is, did Dishonored live up to my expectations, or did it fall flat on its face, or what? Well, as far as the presentation goes, they've done this kind of odd situation. It runs on Unreal Engine 3, and it looks very good for that. Not because of the visual quality. The texture quality is kind of average for a console game. The modeling here and there isn't amazing, but for the most part it's actually really well done. The animations are nice and smooth, and they flow very well, but that's not really what is great about the visuals in this game. It's the art style. It's kind of like BioShock, if you've seen that visual before. It's this kind of stylized look, where it's not quite cartoony, but it's not quite realistic either. And it really fits the game quite well, and I'm really impressed with what they've done with that, as well as just this sense of Dunwall being this city that was once really great, and this technological marvel with stuff being powered by whale oil and other things as well. Like you've got the walls of light, which you got a ton of just technological stuff that you don't really expect to see in a setting kind of like this. And so it's kind of hard to say whether it's actually steampunk or not. It just, I guess it would fit in there because it's kind of Victorian, but at the same time it's not. It's all over the place. But the visual style is what really propels this game forward as far as the visuals go. They really did a great job with making the visuals convey a good atmosphere. And so as you're wandering around Dunwall, you're just seeing all these different things, and you really get this great sense of what Dunwall was and currently is. So while they're not impressive from a technological or quality standpoint, they do a great job of just conveying what they need to convey. And likewise, the sound design is kind of like that. I mean, you've got sound effects which are all very well done, and they, like the gun sounds are nice and beefy and powerful sounding, and the various sounds that you'll be making throughout the game are just great. But they're not really the forefront. What's really the forefront more is the voice acting. Because characters will react to things that you're doing, and they're do it with surprise, or they'll just talk different ways depending on what their character is. And you've got some great voice talent in here, like Susan Sarandon, for instance. And so they did a really great job with the voice cast, just fitting the game quite well. That said, there are a few characters here and there that just sound kind of odd, and I think that's intentional more than a kind of a misstep, but at the same time, they still portray their characters quite well, so they did a good job with that. And it is kind of odd. I'm not used to this kind of technological Victorian-era stuff, or steampunkish, being done with mostly American accents. I'm more used to it being that, of course, British kind of accents. So it's kind of a weird thing that I had to get used to, but it wasn't really a detriment to anything at all. And then there's the music, which I was kind of not all that happy about the music in this game, because when you see the trailer where it has the Drunken Whaler song, which is actually really creepy, then you expect this great soundtrack within the game, and I actually expected to hear that in the game, but they didn't have it in there. And the music that is there is just kind of it's there. That's all it really needs to be. But ultimately, it's not the presentation that matters the most here. No, what really matters are the story and the gameplay. And the story in this one's kind of odd with how they've actually set it up. You play as Corvo Atano, who is the Lord Protector, or the Empress's bodyguard, and the Empress ends up being murdered, and he's framed for it, and the Empress's daughter, Emily, is kidnapped. And so the spy master arrives on the scene and ends up throwing Corvo in prison awaiting execution. And he installs himself as the Lord Regent, and he actually tells Corvo during an interrogation that he was actually behind the whole thing, and it's such a shame, and all that sort of thing. So he's a pretty stereotypical villain kind of character. He's in it for the power and not really much else. But what ends up happening is Corvo is assisted in escaping by a group called the Loyalists, who want to restore Emily to the throne. And the story itself ends up being extremely predictable, and that's its major downfall. But it involves Corvo going around trying to eliminate certain targets that are servants to the Lord Regent, or not necessarily servants, but really assist him in his bid for power, basically. And so with each of the missions, you weaken his power. And the actual way they've set up all of those missions is interesting, because within the missions themselves, the storylines are actually pretty interesting. You get to learn more about the characters, you get to see more of the world around you, the world of Dunwall, and how things interact with one another. And that's pretty interesting. And it's also really interesting to see how your decisions actually affect things in the game world. You can actually get through this entire game without killing a single person. That's very, very rare for a game these days, and it's really hard to do in this game. But the less enemies you actually kill, the lower your chaos rating is, and that affects different things in the game world. And that even goes into the storyline and such, and how characters will interact with Corvo. So they've actually set this thing up to be pretty much a role-playing game rather than just a stealth action game. Your decisions and how you choose to play the game actually really affects how the world sees you, how the world actually turns out, and all that sort of thing. So it's really interesting to see how all of this stuff affects one another. And they've done a really good job of making that happen. But there's a problem with this when it comes to the gameplay, and I'll get to that in a moment. The actual gameplay is a stealth action game, and you are actually doing this all from a supernatural standpoint. Corvo has been infused with magical abilities by the Outsider, who is never actually fully explained. It's just this mysterious supernatural figure. And he ends up giving Corvo this mark, and that allows Corvo to use various abilities, like the Blink ability, which is the most useful thing in the entire game. It's a short-range teleport. So you'll be able to go from, say, ground level up to a signpost or a roof or something like that in an instant. Or traverse various distances in an instant. And that's really, really useful. And it completely changes the dynamic. And the actual entirety of the game is set up around that mechanic. So there's lots of ways you can go about completing your objectives. There's lots of alternate paths. And this is a really cool way of doing it. Because, like I said, you can get through the entire game without killing a single enemy, and what you end up doing is either giving them a sleeper hold, which knocks them out, or you can hit them with a sleep dart. Those are the only two ways to knock out enemies in this game. Otherwise, you can just avoid them if you want. But the weird thing they've done with the powers, you have the Blink ability, you have the Bend Time ability, which allows you to slow down or even completely stop time if you've got it fully upgraded. You've got the various upgrades like Vitality, which increases your health, and Agility, which of course allows you to move better. And you've also got the Possession ability, which allows you to put your form into that of a, say, a rat or another character if you've actually got the upgraded version of it. And you can move them around for a brief period of time. And the way they've actually set that up is kind of cool with how you can do all this stuff, but the majority of the equipment and powers in this game are for a lethal playthrough. And that is what changes the whole dynamic. Whenever you actually kill a single enemy in this game, you raise your chaos. Now, there are 3 states of chaos. You have low, medium, and high. At low chaos, enemies will be less frequent. They'll be in a much more relaxed state. You can sneak around much, much easier. And at a state of high chaos, they're on alert all the time. There's tons more enemies around. You're going to find that things are a lot harder. And so they've actually set it up to pretty much punish you if you don't play this game with the intent of going through and not killing anybody. Now, you can do it with just the targets, but even then, that still raises your chaos. So it's really more encouraging you to go about this thing from a non-lethal standpoint. And it's a really interesting way for the game to take. It's just not what you see in most games. You don't normally see a game say, hey, you have these abilities available to you, but it's best if you don't use them. So it's kind of weird how that works out. You'd think that would be just kind of annoying, where it entices you with all this stuff, like the pistol, like the crossbow with incendiary bolts and stuff like that, as well as the swarm of rats that will come up and just annihilate enemies and stuff like that, or the wind blast, which you'd think would be able to knock people out, but it actually doesn't. It's just fatal no matter how you use it. And you'd think all this stuff would be really cool. I mean, you've got all these different abilities available to you. You can drop down on enemies from above and just take them out instantly. You've got the ability to do fatalities like you could in Dark Messiah. You've got a counter and attack system where you can counter an enemy's strike and you knock them off balance and you can just finish them off with a single attack. And it makes you really feel like a badass. But even though you have all of these really cool abilities that allow you to just dispatch your enemies with reckless abandon, to be honest with you, the game just feels lacking when you're doing that. And I don't know why. I guess it's because once you've done a non-lethal playthrough, you've seen what this game really has to offer, how they put so much effort into making it an alternate thing. And you really see how things turn out much more differently when you're playing it that way. And you feel this really great sense of accomplishment when you've managed to sneak through a whole level without taking out a single enemy. I mean, you might knock them out or something like that if they're getting your way. But without dropping a single enemy, it's this completely different game almost. And to be honest with you, that's a really cool thing. But the weird thing about it is how the difference in length is. I played through this thing first on the non-lethal playthrough, and I ended up getting about a 12-hour game. When I played through it with the lethal playthrough, that was about half. Yeah, it's a really short game if you do the lethal playthrough, because you're taking all the shortcuts. You're just taking out enemies really quickly and everything, and you don't really care. But if you're doing it very slow and methodical, you're exploring the world around you, you're finding all the different paths, you're finding all the different clues that you need to really complete the non-lethal playthrough, then the game becomes just something else entirely. And it's unlike anything else I've ever played. So, is that a good thing? Yes. Did I enjoy Dishonored? Definitely. And it's such a unique experience and such an unusual game. I really wasn't expecting this when I went into it, because I knew that there were multiple ways of doing this, of course. But I didn't expect it to be that different depending on how you played. I didn't expect it to be so profoundly good when I was playing through it with the non-lethal playthrough, even though that was more frustrating in the long run because I would get caught a lot more, and really the only way you can get out of a situation where you've been caught is to fight your way out of it, or to somehow manage to escape, which is much harder to do. But seriously, the sense of satisfaction you get when you've done that non-lethal playthrough is just unlike anything you've ever seen. And ultimately, that makes it overcome all of its shortcomings. And it does have quite a few, don't get me wrong. It does have that issue of enticing you with all of this cool gear and all these different weapons that you can use to just annihilate your foes with no problem. But it's almost like you need to go with the Force. You don't choose the quick and easy path, because that leads to just not as much fun or enjoyment. You need to choose the much harder path, and that leads to much more enjoyment. So, is it for everyone? No. But I still really enjoyed it, and it's a definite contender for my game of the year. I give it a 4.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.